that's kind of what we're saying. Like, that's the formula to gay trash. You have to get rid of all of these things that would create incredible conflict and would not allow these two people to be together, to allow them to be together, to allow this film to just be about two boys who fall in love. And everything else is quite fun, but it doesn't have weight. Welcome to the Gifted Child Symposium podcast. On this episode, we will be dissecting the greatest fictional political scandal of our times. I am talking about the affair between the first son of the United States and the Prince of England, otherwise known as Red, White, and Royal Blue.
So we both watched this movie recently, and I think the reason why we want to talk about it is because it's so interesting in comparison to other types of queer media that we've seen recently. Like, you know, we have really heart-wrenching historical stuff like It's a Sin. We have way more like teenage and like wholesome content like Heartstopper. And recently we've had a lot more like queer trash, like queer rom-com.
It felt like this was both a symptom of the gay trash. Like, we were basically like, as soon as we watched this, we wanted to talk about how queer people deserve quote-unquote trashy content too. But at the same time, it goes kind of beyond trashy into the realms of like fantasy and representation, and it's also nonsense, but it is like a very good point to start with in queer representation, because it is no longer like AIDS dramas and homophobic ending. Red, White, and Royal Blue is both very trashy and just very important, I think, and that led to Felicia just reading the book for this episode, like doing the most.
Yeah. Okay, like, genuinely, I really enjoyed the movie. Like, it was a really fun watch, which was, I think, also, like, why we were so interested to, like, talk about it. Because it's, like, trash, but also clever in many ways, but also nonsensical in many other ways. And I think that's all, like, to do with the book. So Red, White, and Royal Blue is based on a book published in 2019 of the same name, written by Casey McQuinston, who is queer, non-binary, uses they, them pronouns. So McQuinston has expressed that they write rom-coms about queer people because they grew up attending a conservative, evangelical Christian school, and they wanted to write books that would have made them feel less isolated as a queer teenager. So from the get-go, I am already, like, more trusting of this whole franchise because it was actually written by a queer person. I did not know this before we watched the movie because we thought it was written by some straight people.
Yes.
But genuinely, it's a really, like, smart book for how stupid the premise is. We'll go into that, like, later, but I wanted to preface this episode with a quote from the acknowledgements of the book. So McQuinston writes, "Suddenly, what was supposed to be a tongue-in-cheek parallel universe needed to be escapist, trauma-soothing, alternate but realistic reality. Not a perfect world, one still believably fucked up, just a little better, a little more optimistic." So I think what is gonna drive this conversation is the many ways in which Red, White, and Royal Blue separates itself from reality and the many ways in which it references reality.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly it. And like, if you just look at that quote, it's really beautiful and interesting, the word, like the term trauma soothing, because in a way, distancing yourself from reality is kind of like what we're going to talk about, kind of like imagining a better world. But at the same time, that is kind of like, I like that escapism is soothing something while also constantly referencing it, is referencing something that has been missing, a representation that isn't there. And I think that is the case with a lot of gay, quote-unquote gay trash, which is what we're calling trashy, slightly unserious, like gay content. It's not because it's bad, but because it would kind of be like the equivalent of chick flicks. So I think that is the kind of case with a lot of queer trash, that it has kind of occurred as a reaction to homophobia and heteronormativity and straight people taking over the narrative of queer people in order to promote their own agendas. So like, it takes a lot for a film to be gay and fun, and it means a lot to the audiences as well. And when we think about gay rom-coms, we're obviously thinking about the things that they aren't. So we're thinking about the bury your gays trope. We're also talking and like thinking about stuff that it also is like way beyond it, like gay fan fiction, and how these two things kind of like something that is like the worst end to a queer person as written by a straight person, and the most fantastical, escapist, smutty, sometimes queer story. They kind of in our brains exist in opposition, but in many, many ways they do not. And Red, White, and Royal Blue does that. It kind of takes our world and breaks like every tether to it in a way that keeps referencing it.
Yeah.
So because of this, we're talking about gay trash. It kind of has a formula when we were talking about it, like how do we achieve gay trash? What are these tethers? What are these things that exist in the world, that exist for gay people, that no longer exist in these stories? So the first one would kind of be like internalized homophobia. So kind of more of a personal approach.
Yeah, so you can see these in like a lot of sort of teen dramas, teen rom-coms, because obviously teen coming of age stories are all about questioning your own identity and like, you know, finding out who you are. So for example, you have like Sex Education, in which like Adam is super conflicted about his bisexuality, or Heartstopper, where like Nick really struggles, and way darker examples such as American Beauty and The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Yeah, those ones show like internalized homophobia as something that is inherent to the queer experience, where you are hated by, especially Talented Mr. Ripley and American Beauty, is kind of like it leads to suicide, it leads to violence. It's almost like through self-hating, which is obviously, as we know, something that comes from the outside world, it leads to queer people being dangerous. So internalized homophobia is prevalent in a lot of these things, but it can also be a trope that leads to more homophobic content. But this isn't the case for Red, White, and Royal Blue.
No. It is really interesting how much Red, White, and Royal Blue absolutely glosses over the internal coming out stories for these two characters who are like really young, and especially Alex, who doesn't realize he's bi until Henry kisses him. Like it's like a whole thing where he like is like, oh, like I thought I was straight. But that's like, okay, in the book it's like maybe a page and a half. In the movie it's one line.
Yeah, he struggles to name his desire, to label it, but he doesn't struggle because he has it. Like it's so natural.
Absolutely. And the same goes for Henry, whose problem with it isn't that he's like, oh, is there something wrong with me? It's definitely more to do with, damn it, I was born the Prince of England, so I can't like marry a man. Like it's nothing to do with his own perception of himself. So the internalized homophobia is just like non-existent in these stories.
And like toxic masculinity as well. Not that these are like actors, but they are like, Henry's meant to be like the crown sweetheart or whatever. Yeah. Like England loves him. Alex is like hot, like beautiful, like stuff like that. They're not like super mask men, but they are like valued for their image.
Yeah.
And that is never a thing in these narratives. It's never like, oh, they're never like, they're not man enough, or they're not a good son or a good whatever because they like men. Like toxic masculinity and the way it interacts with homoeroticism and like gay desire doesn't exist. Like that has been completely suspended. They never struggle with them being men. Even like Henry says, like it's so insane. Henry says that I went to a posh boarding school, therefore I know how to therefore I know a lot of things, meaning anal. Like he's just like the way that class, masculinity, and homoerotic experiences are just like, they don't matter in that little, like in that just throwaway line of like, oh yeah, everyone in Eton is having gay sex. Like that's just nonsense. Like that would never be admitted in our world.
Yeah. And like moving on from that, like the next layer of like sort of tropes that you find in a lot of queer content, like queer media, is interpersonal homophobia, like, you know, like discrimination from your friends, your family, like being disowned or being bullied, or I don't know, being like kicked out of school, like, you know, like whatever.
Like homophobia that's not necessarily like in a systematic way, but that definitely leads to social isolation, like a lot of, again, like it leads to internalized homophobia as well, like, yeah, like not illegal but also not accepted, basically, which is like what a lot of queer people face right now, even in the most liberal countries. Like, that doesn't mean their parents are going to be liberal or their friends are not going to be weird. And we see that a lot as, like, the main plot points, like, literally the cause of the plot in, like, Happiest Season, which the whole point is that she's, like, in the closet and she fears that her family's not going to accept it. In even things like Prom, where, like, we watched it together, and, like, the main teenager cannot bring a same-sex partner to prom. And everybody's talking about Jamie. He cannot wear a dress and he cannot be feminine in school because that goes against like school policy, and that leads to bullying. And you had a comp that was like very relevant to the interpersonal homophobia.
Yeah. So the most obvious comp for Red, White, and Royal Blue is a Swedish teen show called Young Royals, which is about the Prince of Sweden getting into a gay relationship with this boy from literally the hood. Like, I'm not kidding, it's like the hood. So they both attend,
and he's Latino as well.
He's Latino. He's literally Latino. I love him.
It's Red, White, and Royal Blue in an alternate, more grounded like dimension.
Is it grounded though? So Red, White, and Royal Blue is like firmly in the sort of rom-com genre, right? It's like really cutesy. It's like really like funny. Young Royals is much more in the sort of dark drama genre. Like, it's a teen show, yes, but it's like along the lines of like Gossip Girl. Like, it's really like it deals with some really heavy issues, and I think that's like what is like I think that's what makes Young Royals a really interesting comp to Red, White, and Royal Blue, because they're both targeting sort of the same demographic. Like, it is like the queer teen drama, young adult content that the 2023 calls for, like that Gen Z is asking for. But Young Royals doesn't gloss over all of the issues that comes with being gay in a heteronormative and a homophobic society. So, like, speaking of interpersonal homophobia, right, like with like friends, family, and school, etc., in Red, White, and Royal Blue, Alex comes out and it's like not an issue.
Yeah, like everyone is so supportive.
Yeah, like his parents are so immediately like welcoming, and they give him like resources, and oh my god, the brilliant quote, oh my god, what was it? Oh, Alex's dad saying, "You're after all talking to the patron saint of gender neutral bathrooms in Austin, you little shit." Like,
yeah, when Alex has like an inch of like doubt as to like, maybe my dad won't accept me. Well, that's not an issue if your dad is the patron saint of gender neutral. Like, if your dad has been fighting for queer rights his entire political career. Like, that is the best case scenario in all ways.
Yeah. And like on Henry's side, like, yes, he's not out to like his father and his, like, you know, like the actual like senior royals, but he is out to his sister and their friend, ? What's his name? He has like a best friend. Like, he's out to them, and there's like literally nothing in terms of like there's no hint towards that being an issue, or, you know, like that they find it like a burden for them to like keep his sexuality a secret or whatever like that. It's literally not an issue. And then as soon as Henry and Alex get together in the book, anyway, I can't remember what it was like in the movie, immediately their friends galvanize and like form this giant group chat that just like celebrates them, and they all have cute nicknames for each other, and it's like the queer dream team. Like, it's like not even a bit of an issue.
Yeah, and like you say this thing about like celebrating them getting together and being really, really cute and having like ship names and stuff. I immediately thought like, oh my god, Heartstopper is like that. And it's like, oh god, but it isn't. Like, Heartstopper is probably the most wholesome, wonderful thing queer people can watch right now that is still grounded in reality. But there's still like queer people getting out, like kicking them out of their houses, like queer people's families not accepting them, and then that leading to fights. Like here there's just nothing. Yeah. Like, he comes out and Alex comes out, and Uma Thurman is immediately talking about like safe gay sex. Yeah. Like, there is not an inch of like doubt that any of this is not gonna go well.
Yeah. And so compare that to Young Royals, like bringing this back, there's not necessarily a coming out scene per se, in the same way that there is in Red, White, and Royal Blue. Like, what happens in Young Royals is that Willem, the prince, and Simon, the boy from the hood, they like have sex, and it gets like filmed by this guy at school who's like really jealous of like the royals' status, basically. Like he wants more sort of societal power, so he films them secretly and like leaks it. And what ends up happening is, because like of the way the camera is angled, you can only see Simon's face, and it's just like the back of Willem's head, so he could like plausibly deny that it was him in the video, which is what the palace makes him do. Like they're like, you know, he's like, oh yeah, it was me, and the palace is like, oh no, but we can't say that, you have to deny it, throw the boy from the hood under the bus. And it's like a whole like national scandal. Like it's really like frowned upon, it's really like stigmatized and taboo, like, you know, like it's like really like, oh my god, this is a disaster, like what are you gonna do to the royal image, like what are you gonna do to our family. Their peer was the one who like leaked it in the first place, like because he knew, like this guy knew that it would be like a scandal and it would like take away power from the prince. Like it's a really like manipulative, conscious homophobia. Like it's like really rooted in like playing with the public's stigma of gay people, which is so not what happens in Red, White, and Royal Blue. Like if you think, as now like we're talking about it, let's move on to like societal, like institutionalized homophobia and oppression, because it doesn't have that either, despite Red, White, and Royal Blue being solely about like how they struggle to come out because he's the prince and it's like not accepted.
Yeah, so it's like, this is first of all like set in supposedly the present day, but like an alternative present day, so it's not like gonna have the whole like Brokeback Mountain or like even Carol, where like they were like you know, we're in the gay panic, or we have like in the case of Carol like genuine laws that don't allow queer people to like have custody of their children and stuff. Like we don't have that, we don't even have like that systematic thing. But you're mentioning this thing about like weaponizing people's homophobia for political gain. That literally happens in Red, White, and Royal Blue, like especially in the book, right? Which is very different from the movie, where like it's like the opposition, like the opposite candidate to Uma Thurman, who is Republican, leaks it, and then it doesn't happen, like, and then it doesn't lead to like she still gets elected, like
she still flips Texas,
and they flip Texas, like homophobia just doesn't exist in this universe to the incredible extent that it actually exists in the US and the UK. We have seen, even with like how liberal, or like to an extent like how much freedom queer people enjoy in these two countries that we both live in, like we've both seen like record amounts of like laws being introduced in Congress against queer people this year, or like 2023, and just like in the UK. So it's just like, this doesn't happen in the film and the book. These institutions are almost like they're really worried about their image, similar to what you're saying about young royals, but like it's never actually about, in a way, like homophobia. It's almost like they want to recreate these worries, like, or like the writer wants to recreate these worries, but like in the universe they're not important enough. So like Henry struggles more with like the duties of a royal in general as a character than he struggles with being gay. So like in a way it's kind of like him being gay is just one little thing to add, but like he's been struggling with the duties of a royal anyway.
Like, it's kind of insane that the coming out scene, like Henry's coming out scene to his grandpa, like the king of England, the king, is like the most like anticlimactic thing, because he comes out, the king is like, you know, like oh, the country won't accept someone who is homosexual. Thank you so much, Stephen Fry, for the performance of the century. Anyway, like the point is, like the king immediately comes out with like what you would expect the king of England to reply with, which is like, oh my god, what is this like thing? Like, what is gayness? Like, what is this? But then that's immediately like cancelled out by the thousands of people gathering outside of Buckingham Palace in support of their new gay prince. Like, it's like, firstly, what? Like, firstly, like, who organized that? And, like, how? Like, that would never happen. Like the protest or the gathering is so unrealistic. Secondly, that doesn't necessarily mean it would influence the royal family.
No, exactly. Like, it like, as much as, like, we both obviously support gatherings and protests, like, we both saw the 500,000 people in the first Palestine protest in London.
Yeah.
Did that lead to anything?
Yeah, like,
let alone the royal family, which is, like, this long-lasting institution.
yeah.
Like, it's so bizarre to think that, like, 1,000 people in Birmingham and then 2,000 people in London were gonna make the royal family less homophobic. But in a way, it's because that doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Like, in the book, anyway, it's, like, slightly more discussed, because, like, obviously the movie has, like, cut some stuff for time. But in the movie, it's, like, oh, like, how will we ensure, like, succession? Because, like, obviously the royal family is completely contingent on, like, our bloodline. It has to be, like, our genes. Like, how are gay people gonna reproduce? Like, it, like, really goes into nitty-gritty of, like, the arguments why the royal family probably wouldn't accept a gay heir. But, again, in the book, it's, like, people gather outside. People are, like, yay, Alex and Henry. And it's never brought up again, because happy ending.
Yeah, it's almost like they're sources of conflict for the plot, but they're not real sources of conflict in the universe.
Yeah. It's really, like, bizarre that there's, like, this awareness, but no, like, cause and effect.
Yeah. Like, it's incredibly optimistic and just obviously unbelievable. And, like, the idea that also, like, Uma Thurman's campaign would not be affected. And if anything, her son's gayness or, like, queerness would lead to her re-election. Like, there is that bit where, like, Uma Thurman's aide, who's, like, my favorite character, tells Alex, like, you might have lost your mom the election, or you might have, like given her the election, basically. And it's just like, why?
Yeah. And especially because, like, the election ends up coming down to Texas. Like, it's all about flipping Texas in the end. Like, that becomes, like, the deciding card. And, like, there's no way that in present day Texas they would accept a Democrat. Secondly, a Democrat with a bi kid. Like, there's no way. And, like, like, that's not what the present day landscape looks like.
And Alex was the one who technically flipped Texas. Like, not via his queerness, but via his, like, advocacy and his grassroots campaigns, which is literally in the film a montage of him giving out pamphlets and standing next to a thermometer of voters. Like, he just went there and talked to some Texans and said, my mom's platform is good. And in, like, the real world, that would have never flown. He would have never become a political figure, and everything he said would have, like, stopped being, like, you know, effective the moment he was outed. Yeah.
And while we're on it, like, let's talk about all the other ways in which this frickin' book movie makes no goddamn sense. Because what actually ends up being, like, the real conflict for Henry, anyway, is that he doesn't want, like, a life in the public eye. Like, that is his burden. Like, he didn't ask to be born a royal, and he never asked to be a politician. He never wanted to be a spokesperson for anything. And then so when he starts dating Alex, who is choosing to follow his mom's footsteps, like, it's not like this is a family business. Like, he is choosing to study law to become a politician. Like, he wants to be a congressman by the age 29 or whatever the fuck. That should be, like, a real source of conflict within their relationship. It is not, because they start focusing on the homophobia, which, as we've discussed, is non-existent.
Yeah, like, there's so much of a valid, like, we're both watching this and being like, this is so valid. Like, Henry says something about, like, my life is the crown and yours is politics, and I will not trade one prison for another. That is so real. That is so valid.
Yeah.
And yet that doesn't matter, because it quickly, the plot quickly becomes, as you said, the homophobia, the outing, and then they lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
But it just kind of emphasizes how, if anything, the only qualm for this relationship in Henry's eyes is just that it represents more, like, more pressure, and it is kind of in conflict with his duties as a royal. And, like, now that, like, talking about duties as a royal, like, we were both watching this, and I was just immediately, like, in opposed to Meghan and Harry, like, leaving the royal family, like, society now, after the Oprah interview. The idea that, like, Henry, who's, like, also the spare, and falls in love with an American, and struggle with his life not being his own, is just so accurate.
Yeah.
But, unlike Harry and Meghan, he stays in the royal family.
Yeah.
Like, it's all good.
Yeah, like, in the epilogue, he's like, it's in in the epilogue, he has just bought a, oh my god, what's it called? Like it's like a townhouse in New York City, because he started like a foundation based in New York for some reason, like to help like LGBT youths. So he's like, okay, like I've accepted like my position of power as like a good thing, and I'm gonna use it to platform like LGBT voices like in like underrepresented impoverished neighborhoods or whatever. A few issues with this. Firstly, I don't think that the Prince of England would be allowed to move to New York. Secondly, why would this British royal family funded institution be based in the United States of America? Thirdly, he still wouldn't be allowed to date a US politician because he's not allowed to vote. Like, he's not, like, the royal family, like, regardless of, like, whether or not it accepts a gay prince, isn't allowed to be politically active. So him dating a future congressman and also opening this, like, weird institution in New York City makes no sense, regardless of their attitude toward gay people.
Yeah. And, like, it makes no sense of, like, he has to be, again, like, the crown. He has to be this impartial voice, this institution. And now he's, like, the voice for gay rights.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen. And, like, as I was reading, like, some reviews, because obviously, like, this is a very new film. There's not as much, like, academia as there is in, like, a lot of our other episodes. I remember reading, like, this review that talked about, like, because of this crazy political fantasy, the film clears a path for its romantic one. So in a way, that's kind of what we're saying. Like, that's the formula to gay trash. You have to get rid of all of these things that would create incredible conflict and would not allow these two people to be together, to allow them to be together, to allow this film to just be about two boys who fall in love. And everything else is quite fun, but it doesn't have weight.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like, this universe is, like, this universe that, like, Casey McQuinston created and, like, the film created is so optimistic. It truly is, like, meant to be this kind of, like, utopia, which utopia we've already discussed. Like, it's, like, you know, like, it's nowhere. It's, like, meant to be nothing. So it's completely untethered to reality. But it's this utopia in which the US president is a woman, married to a Latino man. Texas can be flipped. It can be turned Democratic. It's like really, really optimistic. It's not necessarily unrealistic in that it's, like, fantastical. It's just really nice.
Yeah. Like, there is no magic.
Yeah.
But, like, we live in a world, like, it's literally the meme of, like, this is the future liberals want.
Yeah.
A future where, like, we have a female president, we have a mixed race, like, first son, we have, like, just so many people of color in general. Like, even the UK Prime Minister is a black woman, just, like, canon in this universe.
Yeah.
Like, we just have, like, and this is not, in a way, this is not remarked upon, because we all just kind of agree that this is a fantasy, and this is the only universe in which there's just so much diversity and so much liberalism, and everyone is just so cool with everything, that it allows our two, like, unlikely lovers to, like, find the happy ending.
Yeah. And isn't that what rom-com, like, the genre of rom-coms is all about? It's traditional straight rom-coms from, like, the early 2000s or 90s aren't realistic. They're meant to be, like, sort of fantastical, and, like, in an ideal world, this is what your romance would look like. It's, like, meet cute. It's these, like, nice happenstances. It's nice, like, coincidences. It focuses a lot on, like, people's kindness. Like, if you're kind, the universe will get back to you. It's, like, all these, like, serendipitous, like, wishful thinking. That's what Red, White, Royal Blue is, except that they're trying to make, you know, the lack of homophobia just be seen as serendipitous, which is why it's, like, so like, unrealistic.
Yeah. Like, I'm just a boy standing in front of a boy asking him to love me, but they both, like, exist in a world where they have to just be boys, and, like, they cannot not be. Like, they have to just be two people. So we have to erase all of these other forces. Like, straight people get to suspend their disbelief in, like, the realm of logic. Queer people have to do that too, but they have to do also, like, homophobia and oppression and history and, like, in this case, like, fucking foreign policy. So, yeah, you're right.
But yeah, I think the rom-com genre in general is like something that's being reclaimed first by the girlies and now by the queers.
And it's like perfect because I guess in the same ways of like rom-coms being unserious, so much of queer media and just films in general have been just like, historically unserious as well. Like they've always been kind of like independent, made on a tiny budget. They're never like major studios, so they have that like literal quality of like they're like slightly trashy just because they don't have that much money behind it, but also it's just like a very queer thing. Like we always associate campness with queerness for a reason, because like there's just so much like cheerfulness and unserious things. Like I was reading this article that was talking about like the queer rom-com or like the gay rom-com in relationship to like just queer art in general, and how like apparently like Andy Warhol used to kind of make fun of people's snobbery, and he is quoted to say to write in 1975 that all the lighter things in life, which are the most important things, are put down. We associate queerness with campness for a reason, because, you know, like just historically, like queer artists have been just very creative, and also just in general, like just it's just like a style. And in a way, it's also like a reaction when queer people didn't get to have happy endings, let alone happy movies. Like, it's no wonder that we have such a huge wave of kind of unserious, happy, cheerful, unapologetically silly, and even trashy films. And in a way that has created some backlash, because everything, you know, exists in a context. Like, anyway, so like in a way that has created some backlash, because to what extent is like suspending disbelief and completely like, or calling even something like we're doing here, like calling something trashy, like does that like really encompass and sustain the realities of queerness? Like, is it fair to take away struggle when struggle is a part of queerness? Or is that a good thing? Is that like a way that we're envisioning other futures? Like, is it also a good thing that these are like rom-coms now produced by Amazon? Because now they're like mainstream, and in a way like it's amazing to be mainstream and to be like respected and to no longer be like underground. But sometimes a lot of people also interpret that as like it's like selling out, or like now it's not like as important, and is that even like our destination to be mainstream? So all of these things like kind of occur in like as a response of Red, White, and Royal Blue and its debate.
I think it's also like important to keep in mind that Red, White, and Royal Blue, for all of its detachments to reality, is a genuinely fun thing to watch, to read. Like the book certainly took me by surprise. Like, it was really beautifully written at times. Like, you know, like plot aside, like it was genuinely a really entertaining book, and I've read much worse. It wasn't lacking in writing quality. It's like if you want to call it trashy, it's because the rom-com genre lends itself to being seen as trashy. And I think that's like also like what the film was. Like, you know, it was marketed as like queer trash. It was marketed as like this queer fantasy. But in reality, it had like a lot of good one-liners. It had like a lot of quality to it. And it, like you just said, like it is really mainstream. Like, it drew people in. And what's wrong with that? Like, we don't have to have every queer thing be like a deep meditation on, I don't know, the state of the world. Like, it doesn't have to be any deeper than this fantastical fairy tale that they've told us.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would always say that, like, with the whole mainstream debate, it is very relevant when it comes to, like, how much we are craving representation. So it leads to us just, like, spending a lot of money and studios doing it, like, half-assed. But, like, in this case, this is, like, written by a queer author. It has, like, a queer Latino director. It has queer people in its, like, crew. And if anything, like, us calling this trashy, like, it is nonsense, and it is wild, and it is weird. But it also kind of plays into this idea of, like, campness being low quality. Like, it's not even, like, about, like, oh, it has, like, more money than before or anything. Like, literally quality. Because sometimes the movie doesn't look like perfect, but it's also like, yeah, like it is quite fun. The book is way more well written than we think. The writing surprised us. Like, we actually like laughed so much when we were watching the film. Queer people deserve trash too, but also not because it's queer doesn't mean it's trash, and not because it's fun doesn't mean it's bad. And all of these things kind of like exist. Like Red, White, and Royal Blue is not gonna win any Oscars, but it is also, I think, this fantasy where like queer people get to be queer without experiencing all of the things, like where queer audiences are able to like explore like their desires and like leave their worlds in which they might and do face like a lot of struggle, and also where like queer things can exist and be like funded and be really well written.
I think the point of Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I think what I found so nice and charming and meaningful about it, was its way of putting queerness into history, into these sort of like hallowed institutions that are like carved into marble, like, you know, the White House and Buckingham Palace. Because like in the book anyway, there's a real like emphasis placed on Alex and Henry making history. Throughout the book, they exchange these emails, and this is also like in the movie, but like, you know, not as detailed obviously, but like they exchange these emails, and they start doing this thing where at the end of every email, their PS is an excerpt from a letter from a historical figure who is thought to be queer, but, you know, a lot of historians have glossed over because you're not queer unless you have married like someone of the same gender as you or whatever. Like, you know, it's like people who speculate that they were probably queer, but
they were roommates,
literally that. So they start like putting in quotes from like Alexander Hamilton and John Lawrence, or Vita Sackville West and Virginia Woolf, you know, stuff like that. And they kind of like talk about how their letters will one day be sort of like seen in the same lens of like good friends. But yeah, and like at the end, like the movement that it's like the people gathering outside Buckingham Palace, their slogan is History A, which is like a quote from one of Alex's letters, I think, just kind of like talking about how they might be placed into history someday. It's like this way of Casey McQuiston, like the author, being like, yes, the first son of the United States and the Prince of Wales or whatever, the Prince of England, having a romance is like incredibly unrealistic, but people in these positions have always been queer. Like there has always been queerness in these hallowed halls. And I think Red, White, and Royal Blue, in all of its like ridiculousness and like funness and all of these like joyful moments, there is something meaningful there when they are like saying that, yeah, like queer people can also have these like fairy tale romances.
Queer royals deserve representation too. Like,
yeah,
as you say, there are queer people everywhere that have been through history. In a way, having like an alternate history where it is written, it's already like very meaningful, where like these things are recorded, where we're in a world in which like emails leak, but at least they like, you know, even like outing is a confirmation of queerness in a way that historical figures have never had. And like when we were watching, like the actor who plays Henry looks exactly the same as like not even a grown-up, just like a slightly stretched up version of Prince George, like the son of William and Kate. Like, I was watching that and I was like, he's the same person. We are living in a world in which queerness is discussed, it is legal, it doesn't necessarily lead to rejection. Like, people are becoming way more accepted in their homes and in media. The odds are that there have been many queer royals in history.
Yes.
And there will be more. So like this is gonna be huge for little Prince George if he ends up being queer. But like, yeah, like I was so surprised that it's not a huge thing in the movie. Even the quote of like, oh, we're gonna make history or History A is like kind of taking out of context. I think like they just couldn't replicate the back and forth emails.
Yeah.
But it's still like kind of makes that pun, and within that pun there's like this deeply meaningful sentiment of like, we will be seen, we are here, we are part of history, and like we make history not only by being like the first son, like not only but through this affair, but because we exist in it.
If no one does this, like if no one makes content like this for the kicks and the lols, then no one ever is. Like, you have to start somewhere, and not everything has to be a masterpiece, but not everything should be a masterpiece either. Like, this didn't need to be a cinematography masterpiece. It didn't need to be anything more than what it is, which is a rom-com. And, you know, it's really nice for two boys to literally get a fairy tale Prince Charming love story. And for it to be just that, a nice love story with a happy ending, not taking into account I mean, you know, like Disney is also like this. Like, you know, Disney also resolves all this problem with like marriage. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like there is no need to talk about the shift of power of geopolitics.
Yeah, like in a way, if we could like re-record this episode again, queer trash could be very, very easily replaced by queer joy. And that is what Casey McQuinston gave us. We deserve queer trash, we deserve queer joy. It is important to have these like utopias and these spaces to be silly, but also to like imagine a world in which like anyone can be queer and it's okay.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Gifted Child Symposium. We really hope you found it interesting, thought-provoking, and if nothing else, amusing. Please leave a review on whatever your preferred podcast platform is, as it really helps us out. And if you really enjoyed, please share us with your friends. You can find us on Instagram at giftedcs.pod. We'd love to hear from you.
Oh my god, the postscript. We have nothing to say besides how no matter how much we've spent like an hour discussing this film, it will not be comparable to how much I've thought about the acting in this film. Like, how do they get Uma Thurman and Stephen Fry? And second, why did they give us the weirdest performances? Like,
oh no, honestly.
What's up with that? What's up with Uma Thurman's southern accent?
Yeah,
what happened there?
Yeah, whatever casting director chose to make Uma Thurman not only the first female president of the United States, but also have her be from deep Texas. Like deep southern Texas.
Texans have more neutral accents. She's been out of Texas for a long time, and yet she speaks like she's from 50 years ago, and she has never seen a person of color.
Yeah, literally. And Stephen Fry, I mean, I can only see what he did with this role as an artistic choice, as, you know, the magnum opus of his career. Because he had like 3 minutes of screen time and he stole the whole show.
Yeah, no, like that was the last scene that's like, you've never seen the king. Like, it was such high stakes, and we completely broke down when he pronounced the word homosexual. We can't even like replicate it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so insane. Were there more takes? Or is it just how he pronounces it?
Oh, no. And was it Stephen Fry who did it first? Or was the director like, can you say it with a little more je ne sais quoi?
Like, also my other thought was like, you know how like the royal family has its own pronunciations? Like, I've heard so many like interviews with like Olivia Colman or like, you know, people from The Crown saying like, oh, they pronounce house like mouse or whatever. Like, I don't even know. Like they pronounce it like with a little I. Like, do you think this is how they pronounce it? Like, they've never heard of homosexual, so they're like, homosexual, like, or whatever. So yeah, like we've been hyping this up, but here is Stephen Fry's unique take on homosexual.
I'll ask it then. Why must we maintain a traditional royal image?
Because the nation simply will not accept a prince who is homosexual.